The United States of America, the world's dominant power for over the past 3 decades. It's been involved in so many parts of the world ever since the major defeat of its only rival, the Soviet Union. What if after the USSR collapsed, Americans got tired of having to pay for wars all over the world and their family members dying in them or coming home severely injured? That is the question of this alternate timeline. With America withdrawing into isolationism, the many European countries that rely on it for defense would have to remilitarize and start spending less of their money on their economies and more on their armies, so they would be more militarized but a bit poorer. The first military conflict the United States got involved in after the Cold War was an invasion of Panama at the end of 1989 until the beginning of 1990. Taking it out of history doesn't change much. It was all used as a way to keep the Panama Canal in the hands of the Americans. In any case, there were already treaties that were signed in 1977 that said in 1999 the Panama Canal would pass into Panamanian hands, and that the United States would protect the canal and Panama if necessary. The Americans were not going to leave the canal in the hands of an enemy dictator of the United States. A notable change that would happen to the world without US interference would be that nothing protects Taiwan from the oncoming Chinese invasion. They probably would take the whole of the island. With regards to the next military conflict the United States got involved in, which was the Persian Gulf War, without American military bases in Europe, the military build-up to the Gulf War would likely take months. Hell, it's possible that the delay could give Saddam Hussein enough time to attack Saudi Arabia, to get Saudi Arabia to commit to neutrality, or may even become under Iraq's influence. In order for America to remain truly isolationist, we're going to have to take 9/11 out of the picture. Shortly before the Persian Gulf War started, Osama bin Laden offered the King of Saudi Arabia help to kick Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. The King of Saudi Arabia wisely chose the United States over Al-Qaeda. With an isolationist America, they would have no choice but to choose Al-Qaeda. Even with bin Laden's genius, Iraq would still smash the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There are videos of Saudi F-15s using Sidewinders to down Houthi drones that were made using duct tape and only cost around $150. Meanwhile, Sidewinders cost around $1 million. An F-15 costs no less than $150 million, plus around $40,000 per flight hour. For those of you out there who want to behave like edgy teenagers and say that 9/11 was an inside job, and if it wasn't, then Osama bin Laden is such a military genius that he would easily tip the war in favor of Saudi Arabia. Well, Shias were suppressed since they were considered potential allies of Iran under Saddam, but Iraq was certainly less fervently religious compared to Saudi Arabia, and most Kurds are officially Sunni, but they're also more nationalistic than religious. Plus, Saddam used that fact to portray himself as not being anti-Shia. The way he treated Kurds was bad, but on the other hand, they also worked for Iran and the US. Depends on the Kurdish factions, of course. There are many. There are some pro-Iranian, some anti-American, some pro-American, some anti-American, etc. The point is, they were the useful idiot for all of Saddam's enemies. That's why he focused on fighting them. It was also a way to turn the problem into a nationalistic one. Arabs, both Sunni and Shia, were still one people. Kurds, on the other hand, belonged to a completely different group. They were the uniting factor in the beginning, but Shias themselves still felt threatened because they were seen as potential traitors. So, declaring war on a Sunni terrorist group like Al-Qaeda, Saddam Hussein would have used this to unite the Shias. Both Shias and Sunnis would fight them. Sunnis because they see Saudi Arabia as a US Zionist puppet creation, and Shia simply because it's Sunni and because it has Al-Qaeda on its side. And Osama bin Laden would have to die in this war in order to prevent 9/11. After the Persian Gulf War, Saddam Hussein would turn his fangs to Iran and attempt to take Khuzestan from them again. which is a part of Iran dominated by Arabs with a lot of oil, and Saddam Hussein wanted it because of pan-Arabism and all the oil there. And this time he would win because not only would he have all of Kuwait's oil money in addition to what he already had, but also much of Saudi Arabia's. Another thing is, it's hard to overstate how transformative Iraq was to American politics. For the last 30 years. Without Iraq, there's no WMD presentation to the UN, so Colin Powell has his legacy credibly intact. The trillions of dollars spent in Iraq are probably spent in the war on drugs. George H.W. Bush might have been popular enough to win a second term without Iraq. The Democrats probably wouldn't win the House in 2006 midterm since Bush is probably less unpopular. And I can't say whether he would win the 2004 election since without the fear generated by 9/11, he wouldn't have had a lot of fear to exploit, which I think was a deciding factor in that election. But also without the highly unpopular Iraq war, he might have won. But regardless, if Hillary and Obama still go head to head for the 2008 election, without Hillary voting for the Iraq war and Obama never voting against it, means that Obama probably doesn't defeat her in the 2008 primary. Although if the crash still happens in that year, we'll probably still see the Democrats either take or keep control of at least one chamber of Congress. If Hillary wins in 2008, that would mean there would have been no Affordable Health Care Act, which led to the Tea Party, which led to Donald Trump. Then again, Hillary could be so unpopular, Trump could run for president in 2012 and win, like he did in our timeline in 2016. Just like with my last timeline, the Kurds would be the big losers of this one. The next military conflict the United States got involved in was the Somali Civil War. If America didn't get involved in it, that wouldn't change much. Somalia is a mess regardless of who supports who. The only side effect is a little bit less Somali pirates and a slightly more stable government. Because if you let someone develop their own area, they are less of a mess. And when you support them and then stop supporting them, or arm one or multiple factions against each other. When it comes to the breakup of Yugoslavia, you might think that the Serbs were losing the wars before NATO ever got involved, because you may have seen something like these two maps I'm showing you here. However, NATO was actually involved since the very beginning. Every time the Serbs started an offensive, NATO threatened them. The Serb leadership got scared because NATO didn't threaten action against the military. That was already happening. The real problem was they threatened to carpet bomb Belgrade and other major cities. They would have had around 500,000 civilians dead in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. Unofficially, NATO was involved since 1992. Officially, it was since 1994. In both Krajina, helping Croats, and in Republika Srpska, helping the Bosniaks. That help was quite substantial and included training, logistics, targeting data, and operational planning, etc. And also direct help by bombing Serb heavy weapons, artillery, and armor in support of Croat and Bosniak attacks. With America out of the picture, we'd most probably see the Russians helping Serbia in the breakup of Yugoslavia, trying to get the best deal for them, and the Saudis helping the Bosnians, trying to get the best deal for the Bosniaks, and the Germans and Austrians supporting the Croats, trying to get the best deal for themselves, since in our timeline, Germans and Austrians virtually own the entire Croatian tourism. In 1999, during the Kosovar War for Independence, NATO dropped 30 tons of depleted uranium onto Serbian Yugoslav forces. In the long term, this can be more dangerous than nuclear bombs. You see, if you drop a nuke, it affects that area where it was dropped, but if you drop a lot of conventional explosives with uranium added to it, it spreads everywhere. Depleted uranium is lighter than enriched uranium, uranium, and it can be carried by the wind. Particles of it can be carried for hundreds of miles. Although much less radioactive, it's still radioactive. The number of cancer cases went through the roof after 1999, along with a tenfold infertility increase. Modern Serbia would have a population at least 20% larger and much younger than in our timeline. So Serbia would be like a small Southern European version of what Russia is in our timeline in this timeline, since Russia was the biggest piece of a breakup in the 1990s, but NATO didn't bomb the hell out of it. And many accused the KLA or Kosovo Liberation Army of being involved in narco-terrorism. So if these accusations are true, there will be a lot less narcotics being traded in Europe. And while all this is going on, Russia would likely invade and take over the rest of the former Soviet Union. You may think China would want to go after some of the smaller former Soviet Union countries that are very close to China, like Tajikistan. However, the CTSCO would put them off. And Russia's going to have a pretty easy time taking over these countries, considering there were large numbers of ethnic Russians in each of these countries. For example, when Kazakhstan became independent, there were more ethnic Russians living there than ethnic Kazakhs. In 2011, America launched Operation Observant Compass, which was a defense operation initially focused on apprehending Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army in Central Africa. The LRA is a rebel group which operates in northern Uganda, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic, that wants to overthrow the Ugandan government and rule Uganda according to the Ten Commandments and Akoli nationalism, which is listed as a terrorist group. It's involved in abduction, mutilation, child sex slavery, and forcing children to participate in hostilities. By the time the Americans arrived, the Ugandan military had already done the single most important thing to defeat Kony, which was drive him off and deprive him access to Akoli land. The LRA was an exclusively Akoli cult and relied on child soldiers being raised from that tribe. Although abductions of adults continued after the LRA was chased into Central Africa, they were limited to porter or forced worker roles because the language barrier made tactics and even the conversion process impossible. So with the supply of new troops choked off, Uganda could have continued to pick them off in small engagements. The UPDF general had better arms and, depending on location, could bring light machine guns, rockets, artillery, and attack helicopters to bear. It's uncertain how long they would have held out for. American involvement increased the effort to slim the LRA's numbers by encouraging defections, which was moderately successful, but the UPDF would likely have forced the LRA into the shrunken and effective force they are today, just with more time and with more casualties. It's hard to say what the butterfly effect would be of more casualties and it taking more time. The American approach basically reached the same end while saving lives on both sides by discouraging skirmishes. I think the ripple effect would involve individuals from either side who will be important at some point in the future, but who died in the conflict instead. Without Obama leading America, an interventionist America that is, to tell the NATO countries to bomb Libya, Gaddafi would still be in power. However, he would be very unpopular, especially after oil prices drop and the economy of Libya crashes, like Venezuela. It would be very similar to Venezuela. We would see a lot of demonstrations, protests, and riots. The only big difference is that since Venezuela is tropical, people would be picking fruit off the tree for free since they don't have any money to buy food, while Libyans would have a tiny bit of money to buy a tiny bit of food just to keep themselves going, as well as the fruit in Venezuela does for the Venezuelans. There may even be a civil war. However, it would have have less division, since it would just be Gaddafi loyalists versus rebels, while in our timeline, the civil war is between hundreds of different Berber and Arab tribes. The NATO bombing of Libya in our timeline caused it to go from being one of the most stable countries in Africa to being a failed state governed by tribal warlords. And many who expanded into the power vacuum after Gaddafi was taken out have been involved in human trafficking, and this even restarted a black slave trade. And the human smugglers have turned Libya into a magnet for people who want to enter Europe through irregular means. The result of this and Italy's proximity to Libya has resulted in it absorbing over 600,000 illegal immigrants between 2014 and 2018. Many, but not all of these illegal immigrants come from very hostile cultures. And this is the part where it gets NSFW, some of the heinous crimes that have caused xenophobic backlashes. Like, one woman's body parts were discovered in briefcases scattered, and a detective had said that because some of her body parts were missing, they were cannibalized in some Nigerian polytheistic ritual. Because of heinous crimes like this, a new survey revealed that over a third of Italians say that all non-EU citizens should be expelled from Italy. And legal immigrants who already lived in Italy are now scared to stay in Italy. So Italy would be considerably less xenophobic in this timeline. On the negative side, Libya would be ruled by the monster of the Maghreb for much longer. The same guy who not only expelled all ethnic Italians from Libya, but also forced them to dig up dead bodies and travel with them on their way to Italy. Started wars with Chad and Egypt, banned football matches, concerts, and cinemas, caused rampant corruption, which led to supermarkets becoming so empty that they caused food riots. And anybody who complained would become another victim of the mass executions broadcasted day and night on public television. Funded Arab terrorists who carried out shootings in airports in Rome and Venice, had airplanes over Niger and the UK blown up, walked around Tripoli looking for girls that he liked, who he would later rape. And last but not least, the service group. If you're very curious, I'll let you Google that yourself. Even I have my limits. Several countries, including the United States, accused Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia at the time, of rigging elections after he ran for an unconstitutional fourth term. He was eventually kicked out by the United States. 20 protesters were killed and hundreds were arrested. Even if other countries don't take him out, just because America isn't involved, this doesn't change much, because eventually a member of the same party, Evo Morales, was a part of won the next election. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave this video a like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel.